can you tell us what exactly do you use?
Yes. So first off, let me say this. I use a lot of library books, so I don't have all of the books that we've used over the years. There have been amazing resources. They're just library books, and we have to turn them back in.
Yeah.
But I have a few. One of the early ones that I use, and a lot of these I read them aloud. So the title of the first one is African Icons 10 People Who Shaped History. And it starts way back, and I'm just going to flip through it too. It starts with telling you the introduction of when Africa fueled the world. So it just starts there. It starts when we were actually back on the continent before we were spread out over the world. So we start there. When I teach my kids history, the first history we learn, the very first, we start from African history.
Wow.
With and you think about that, we are generally in other curriculums that I've used, generally the first when they do like their history spine, the first kingdom or that we're introduced to is from what I can remember is China. We did like the Chinese dynasties.
Yeah.
Um, and then we did ancient Egypt. But here's another fact. A lot of people hear ancient Egypt and they don't realize that Egypt is a part of Africa.
Africa. Yeah.
It, and
Hmm.
and we don't think about that. I know I never did. And I learned about ancient Egypt in my history growing up and I never made the connection. Never. And so yeah, we make that connection here obviously very early. But we start with this, and this one is by Tracy Batiste. Okay, so I want to make sure I mention the author for those who won't
Thank you.
be
Yeah.
able to see the video. The next book I use is called Black Pioneers of Science and Invention, and this one is by Lewis Haber. And this book is well loved and well used. Whenever we write science reports or history reports, the first place we come is to this book after the icons book. So let me hold it a little bit closer so that everyone can see the titles.
Perfect. Yes.
And we use this book. So my kids don't learn about Thomas Edison and Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. We don't learn about those first. The first people we learn about is us. And then everyone comes second. Now, the reason for that, I want to say this, so much of our history is erased, and so much of our um, inventions are erased. And if you go to different museums, especially in the US, if you go to different museums, you'll find all this history of us. And you're like, I never knew we made the blender. I didn't know we made the shoe last, and I didn't know we made the shoe last and we made a machine to help make it even better. I didn't know we made refrigerator trucks or things like that. You
Wow.
won't know that because traditional textbooks have um, the European American inventors first, and they never talk about how a lot of their ideas were from um, African Americans who they hired to work as their laboratory assistants, who had who brought the ideas to them. But in that time, they could not get credit. Like their names are not even on reports,
Wow.
but all the drawings are under their the blueprints are under signed by these African American assistants. So we learn African American history first and then European history as a supplement to the backdrop first. So that was that. The other thing is we also cover finance, but we also cover finance from a Black perspective. And let me tell you why. It's really, really important. Um, if you don't see someone like you holding your money and helping you with your money, it's sort of hard to trust that they have your best
Wow.
interest at heart with your money. Okay. We were good with money. We built kingdoms. You got it. And we had gold and precious gems. So we knew how to, hold on to it, make it multiply and trade with other people well, long, long before we came to America. So I combined these two books right here. So this first book is called The Rise and Fall of Black Wall Street, The Seven Key Empowerment Principles. And this is by Robin Walker. Okay. So our kids learn that we were successful, not were, we are, and we can be successful right here.
Hmm.
And I combine it with this book called How to Turn $100 into $1 million. Now, I'm not trying to teach my kids like I'm go out there and get $1 million, but I am trying to teach them the very basics of investing, just the
Absolutely.
basics. And this is
Absolutely.
from James McKenna and Janine Glista with Matt Fontaine. So I'm going to try to hold it up. It's a bigger book, so it's kind of hard to get all the
Perfect.
everything in there, but I think I got it. And this book is Earn, Invest, and Save. And this book is just super duper practical. It breaks money down to words that your kids can understand. And let me say, specifically, modern day kids can understand. It's really fun and it has really neat goal setting pages in it. And my kids really enjoyed me doing this. By the way, all these books that I'm holding up, I mostly did read alouds to my kids. A lot of them have big words, and kids may not want to sit still for all of that. If you said, "Here, take this book and go read it," so all of these, my kids have heard me read it aloud, and we just go slow. Sometimes books take us 2 years to finish because we need to go slow enough. Um, so don't feel like you have to rush through any of this or make a kid sit down. Just pick and choose. It's what I did, and you have to start somewhere. So that's what I did. But this book in
Yeah.
particular, it's good, but it's also a little sad because it is the rise and the fall. But it does show your kids that um, we can set our own measuring guide to being successful. Our success doesn't need to look like anyone else's. And this is a really good book for teaching the key principles of that, of success, by Black people, for Black kids and Black adults as well.
Wow.
Let's see. Here's another book that we use, and my kids, I would say this is more definitely for teens, but it would work for preteens. So I went through it when my boys were preteens, and we're going to go through this book again. Now, okay, this is Dr. Ben Carson, and I know people have very strong feelings for or against. Um, he's in the middle for me. I'm not necessarily like yay yay, and I'm not also like, oh, throw the book away, burn it. But I will say this: if you just take the book, if you just take it for the principles that he's teaching, this book is like having an expensive mentor for your children in your hands, affordable for just the cost of
Wow.
the book. Like, I really recommend it. I Let me say this: I extremely recommend this book for Black boys. If you are raising a Black son, get this book. Okay. This book
Wow.
says all the things that you would want a Black man, to sit down and tell your sons about life. And I mean, he covers everything from girls to money to how to be the best version of yourself, and how to support, but also how to be loved. It's all in this book. Okay. And this book also, I love it. Every chapter has discussion points, and I use these with my children. And when I say preteens, my 9-year-old son, my 11-year-old son, and my 12-year-old son, that's the ages they were when we did this book. Um, we were able to use those discussion points, even though this book is recommended for teens. And I would say, especially, I'm going to read this book in our senior year. We're going to go back over this book again with my kids when they hit like junior and senior years. Um, and it's about thinking big. And it's just about, no one has to tell you how to think. You get to think, and you get to be the very best version of yourself. But what's super important is he gives examples as a Black man of what he went through, and it's super
Mm.
relevant for today. So my kids, so after every book I read, I ask for their feedback, and they said we liked this book because we could see ourselves in Dr. Carson.
Wow. Wow.
Okay. And we just don't think about that. A lot of self help books, and I say this because I mentored teens in the past. I don't get to mentor as much now, but except maybe I mentor my own kids. I'm not sure if they
I'm
like
sure
that, but
you are.
that's what I do. um, but a lot of the books I had access to were not written by African American males. And I did a lot of mentoring to African American males. And I just wish I would have had this resource back then when I was doing it, because to be able to see yourself and hear a story from a man who's walking the same path that you might be walking is just, nothing can replace that. So this book was
Absolutely.
super helpful.
Absolutely.
Um, I want to say another thing. When you were talking about a thankless job, this book, Dr. Carson thanks his mom so much. It really made my kids, they told me with their own mouths, it made them realize how much I do. Now,
Wow.
that maybe for a minute they thought about it. It's gone away
Yeah.
by now, but
Hey, but
but
that was a happy
the
minute, though.
right, it was a happy minute. But yes, this is another thing that it helps you realize the power of adults in your life, why they're necessary. Because I
Hmm.
think teens and preteens sometimes question that. They're like, "Why? I can get along without you." So this book was good. Um, Let me see. I don't want to overwhelm you. Here's another one that's super important to us right now. This is one that we're using this year as our history spine for my 8-year-old and my 9-year-old and my 11-year-old. We're using A People's History of the American Empire. And this one is an illustrated book right here. So they really
Oh
love
wow.
me reading this one. Okay, this one is by Howard Zinn and Mike Kanapaki and Paul Buell. Okay, I may not be saying their names right. Okay, I know that some people, when they hear the words Howard Zinn, might just be like, yeah, no, we're not. But I like this because this book tells history from an oppressed, an indigenous, and a women's point of view as well. So
Mm.
this history tells it from Black perspective, indigenous perspective, and women's point of view, because most history is not told. In fact, I would say no history that I ever studied in school and any curriculums that I researched for my kids told history from this perspective. However, we are some of the biggest populations would be
Mm.
African Americans, indigenous peoples, First Nations peoples, and women. And so this is like you can add it to the normal American history and add this to it, and then you have a really great picture of American history. So we're starting this book this year. So we're not super far into it, but so far we are learning so much. So
That's
yeah,
wonderful.
this is what we're using. hmm So
Well,
I'm going to stop
can I
there.
pause?
I have so much. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't want to. I didn't want to totally. I just wanted to jump in, just at least with some of these that ones that you were showing for. So I
Uh-huh.
really like the way that you have approached how you said we learn our history first, because it's really an interesting approach, and even the way your explanation of how you even came to that conclusion. Because some might be like, "Oh man, you're making this entire, you know." Subjected people. I can't think of the word, but just basically you're making your own island. You're making yourself an own island over here. But you've made the point so well that it's just it doesn't start at slavery. That's not just us. Like you didn't start from this point of trauma that is here. It goes back, and that is beautiful then to see. Yes, there was a time of trauma that was there, but you don't have to be like my basically because I've always said to people like, well, when I look on ancestry.com, it's kind of hard to find anybody when they're hanging from a tree because it's just literally the sad reality that that's just it. That's just the only thing
Right.
I know about our family. Then you're mentioning all these inventions that we're doing, and here I am sitting here. I'm not trying to do a humble academic flex, but okay, I got a master's degree, and I don't even know these things you're talking about. How Black people have invented these different things, and to me, it's like wow, I definitely want my children to be able to be aware, not just that George Washington Carver and Booker T. Washington were alive. Like I want them to know that there's more people in history that are taking place. So, what some practical things? I'm sure it's easy to find now. With this philosophy that you're taking now, you you look for curriculum and different things that I think that have highlighted from the perspective of those who are oppressed, the indigenous, and also women's perspective, and those are lacking. Do you then, give them as well the Eurocentric view as well? At least let them read a textbook of like that, or how do you then walk between that balance of the two? Do you just keep it away from them, or do you let them read it? How do you go do that?
Well, I couldn't if I wanted to keep them away from it. It's all around
Ooh,
us. I,
mm.
so
Well,
so I hate to put it like that, but in particular, we live in the South. Everywhere we walk, we see
mm,
standard, I'm going to call it standard American history. That's what I'm going to call it. We see standard American history whether we
okay.
wanted to see it or not. Okay? So in my opinion, I am just adding to what they're already getting. Um, I, let me say this: I strongly feel that kids should have both sides of an argument, even if it scares you as a parent, to make sure that they hear the other side that you don't agree with.
Amen.
If your
Amen.
children do not hear both sides when they get older, they are not going to trust or believe your opinion, and you're not going to be a nice high voice in their life. And you want your kids to know that you are not perfect, that you are still learning, and that you don't have all the answers. And you want your kids to be well. I am assuming that everyone wants this, okay? So when I say um, you want your kids to be able to go out and make well informed decisions. Um, in America, in order for our governing system to keep going on as it is, we need well informed adults. And if you
Mm.
don't know how to go get your information for yourself and research, and make sure things that you're getting are true, um, and you have can support them with facts, then our government is not going to we're not going to get better. We're going to get weaker as a government if we don't have citizens who we're injecting in, new citizens or new adults who can vote and all that and lead, if they don't know how to make well informed factual decisions. That's my period. So yes, I share them this side of history. It's not pretty. I'm gonna be honest with you. It's
Yeah.
ugly. um, and it's also not always not fun to be the voice that is a dissenting voice, to go against what standard American history is. Um, but they have both sides and they can make a decision. Their kids are really smart. They can make a decision. They can figure out, it's probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that I think the quote of the podcast is what you said about 40 minutes in. I'm making a note to myself, just making when you're just explaining about showing your children both sides, because if you just show them this one side, then you might not have high as a voice as later you get down the years, because it was like, wait a second, I heard, I'm not speaking of me first person, but just like I heard as a child that, that these people did nothing good. And then I find out, that actually they did some things good, some things bad. It brings all that you have said to them into question, and questions your credibility then as a parent. So, whenever there's a clear history, I mean, whenever in history there's a clear hero and a clear villain, you're not really getting history, because there we are all sinners. And so I think the way that you're showing forth and being able to balance the two, I applaud your work. I applaud your going through and reading books. I applaud the effort that it takes reading out loud. Wow. I mean, just the thought of reading those books and different things and going through them, like, I mean, you are all in, and I love it. And I'm grateful that there are young men that are coming out, and young ladies. Obviously, you have a little girl too as well, that their parents are taking this role super seriously, and actually just basically, signifying, or just basically just I don't want to use the word idolizing, but the exact example of what we've been talking about in the education podcast, of just, this is not someone else's job, this is my job that Lord's given to me. And I'm sure people sometimes, like, the homeschool jokes probably bug people like you, where it's just kind of like they don't even know 2 plus 2, or they get up and do pajama schoolwork or whatever. And I'm like, this mom's working her tail off over here to make sure that her kids get a balanced education. And so, man, I tip my hat to you very much, Diane. Now, as we leave this discussion, I know there's many things that you could share, but if you were just going to give any advice to parents who might be looking for this alternate path, or maybe adding some things, they feel like there are some weaknesses in their American standard education their kid is receiving, but not sure where to get started. Obviously, this podcast is a great. You've given some great resources, but honestly, any advice, just straight up, just, what you seem. Some may say this is overwhelming. Some may say, I'm still on the fence. Any advice as we close this portion out of this practical education that you've really helped us out with?
yes. The first advice is your kids were given to you,
Mm.
so you know your kids, okay. And the best advice I heard is we are our kids' first teacher. We taught them how to tie their shoes, or we teach them their colors. We teach them their name. We teach them, whether we realize it or not, how to walk.
Yeah.
We teach them how to hold their spoon, right? How to swallow slowly, chew their food all the way. We teach them all these things. Why suddenly at 4 years old is it important that they go away from you for anywhere from 4.5 hours to 7 hours to be taught by someone else? What automatically makes you unqualified to teach? Just think about them. Just put that out there. Okay. All right. I told you,
Wow.
like, homeschooling really homeschooling really does make you question everything. Okay. I can't help it. I just question things. That's number one.
Yeah.
With that being said, you can teach. If you can read a book, you can teach your kids. I want to say this to moms who are overwhelmed. When I had my fourth child and I was teaching at this point my three sons, well, I don't think the third son, I don't think he was in school yet, but I was definitely teaching the first two. I was exhausted. And then about 2 years after having her, I was exhausted again. And one of the best things I ever did is we just put away all written schoolwork. I mean, I just couldn't do it. Okay. And I picked up books like this, or books like this and this.
Hmm.
And they're just storybooks, but Black children are the main characters in these books. And I read these books out loud to my kids. And that was school. And they would sit, and I would read maybe 30 minutes at a time. And then in the next hour, I'd read again. And my kids learned so much from read aloud things. And the reason I'm a make that important point. Traditionally, in African American homes, they have the least amount of books for kids in homes that I've seen. And
Wow.
part of my job, I used to have to go out, and I would go out with the social worker, and we'd, like, try to help kids who were struggling in school. And they never had as many books as other homes that I went into. Reading aloud to your kids is one of the biggest educational gifts you can give, by far, bar none. I still remember my parents reading little books to us, and I'm almost 40, and I can still remember, like, very clearly words, whole pages of books, because they sat there and they read them out loud to us. It's a gift that you give, and you help your kids understand context and definitions of words by reading, especially so reading books that are slightly above their grade or age level. You help expand their vocabulary. Like it's known that if you read aloud to a child, they will. I forget the exact percentage. I don't have the notes right in front of me anymore, but they can move up by grades just from someone reading aloud to them. It's incredible. So
Wow.
if you're struggling, you're feeling overwhelmed, sometimes, I'm not saying put away the written work all the time, but what I am saying is you can make that less, and you can put more importance on this and go about your day. The other thing, remember I said I was homeschooled, and I remember when I called my mom and I asked, I'm kind of struggling, with homeschooling my own kids. A big thing is be consistent. Pick top three subjects that you're going to be consistent in every day, and then two rotating subjects. We call it like a loop schedule. You can loop them once a week or twice a week. So my top three. So I'm what they consider. We call ourselves almost unschoolers, meaning my kids, especially because they're in high school grades now, they asked for some structure. So some of their day is structured class. The other part of their day, they're in charge of. Okay. So my I call them life skills classes that you have to get through life, and they are math, they are writing, and they are reading. Because if you can do all of those, you can get yourself through life. History and science, my kids learn what subject they want to learn, or what item they want to learn about, or person, or place. They choose that on their own, and they do that as study as in depth or not as they want. And we supplement with a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of curiosity stream videos, um, and then they also while I told you the people's history of American Empire, that is specifically for my 9-year-old and my 11-year-old. My other two sit in on the history because they want to hear about it too, just because they want to. Also, consider teaching history from a storybook a storybook form. So my kids asked to learn. They want to study ancient African history again this year. So we're going to use it. We're going to study it um, through the book called Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky, and it's written by Kwame Mumbalia. But it's a story. But while you go through it, you're going to hit different points of history, and we will take from there. We will get on Curiosity Stream and YouTube and learn about the different things in a more factual way. So that's how we do a
Oh,
lot of our history and science. We do a lot of it this way. Nat Geo videos and stuff, they're amazing. This is how we do a lot of our history and science. What I was saying is, again, this is to make I don't want to belittle it. Homeschooling is hard. It is a full time job on top of somebody still got to cook and clean, and you still have to take kids to field trips and game practices, and you still got to be nice mom at the end of the day. Well,
yeah. Yeah.
I'm telling you all these tricks. So I think I've been homeschooling. I've lost count of the years, but I want to say it's either 12 or 13 years at this point that I've been homeschooling. And yes, I think it's 12 years. It can take a lot out of you. It's really hard. So you have to find ways to make, let me say this, home school should fit your schedule, not the other way around. If you
Ooh.
homeschool, if you homeschool, it's because you have said, I want it to look different than public school. So you are never trying to recreate public school at home, ever. You are trying to make learning fit into your daily life. And my philosophy is this: I want my kids to love to learn for the rest of their lives. So if I try to recreate school at home, I'm going to recreate a hatred of learning. And I don't ever want that. I want my kids to always want to pick up a book or always want to learn something new. And you won't do that trying to recreate standard American education at home. You won't.
Wow, some powerful words there. I love it that you were mentioning don't recreate it, basically take it and make it American Standard Education and put it inside the home. And then on top of that, you're instilling something indicative by what you said about your oldest coming and listening to the history lesson, a love to learn, instilling a love that this is like sometimes as soon as we turn a tassel, they're not done learning. We know that. We're adults and we realize that we are consistently adding different aspects of education to our life. But the fact is like they've already got something that few would have, and that's like go for training for a job where it's like, oh, I know how to digest this. I know I want to be able to study more.
Mhm.
And then even using methods that many people aren't going to use, the curiosity streams and the YouTube videos. We have so many resources at our disposal that are literally free right now. Is that not? I mean, that is definitely the case. And it's
Yes.
just, using an amazing path and, giving them the option to be able then to be able to explore upon their own. This has been extremely, extremely helpful. So, wow, you've given us a lot of information, Diane, and we are very grateful for you joining us on this episode. So many practical tips. I hope as well that if you're a listener, to be able to see even the video version where she's showing the books as well. That's going to be linked in the show notes. And even on top of that as well, if you have questions, send them to a burden for the times at gmail.com. We'll do our best to get it to Diane. If you have specific questions about maybe some ideas or maybe some other books, and we'll try to give the book list that she just mentioned as well, also within the show notes. But many, many resources you have given. I have no idea. I know that you're going to be a help to many. Practically, Diane, you've been a help to me. So I know you'll be a help to those that are there. Usually, before we end every podcast episode, we always ask this question, and that is, are all hearts and minds clear? Which means if anything else that you want to miss, sometimes I know I sit and I think like, oh, there's one more thing. If not, it's perfectly fine, but are all hearts and minds clear as we get ready to close it out?
Yeah. And I think I want to say this. Um,
Okay.
it's okay. It's okay. It's okay to change. It's okay in your homeschool to change and say, "Wow, I thought this was working, and it's not." And also, last year's child is not today's child, so don't use last year's books with today's child. Keep learning. Keep growing. You can do this.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for a closing word. I'm not going to try to add anything to it to try to make it. You've made it nice and succinctly and beautifully put. We thank you for you joining us on this episode. Check us out at a burden for the times at gmail.com for correspondence or at burdenforthetimes.com. And please reach out with any questions whatsoever. But thank you so much once again, Diane. And we look forward to you joining us next time.